Hey, what's happening? Tim Werner here. And I'd like to conduct a meditation on cloud computing. Just the idea came to me out of the clouds last night when I was thinking about what my next subject for this video series would be. I think back to when my daughter was like 4, maybe. She's been playing Minecraft just about all of her life. And I remember her introduction to the cloud was the idea that her game saves were available in the cloud, somewhere out there. And if something were to happen to our Xbox, or if we bought a new Xbox, something catastrophic happened where the game was no longer available, we could reinstall it and we could get our game back because they're stored in the cloud. I think that at age 13, she's got a pretty robust understanding of the cloud. Now, what is the cloud? It's an abstraction, isn't it? Where we look up to the sky, you see a blanket of white fluffy clouds. There's the International Space Station on the other side of the clouds. There's probably several airplanes. Maybe there's Felix Baumgartner getting ready to jump out again and do a skydive. But the idea is that we can't see what's on the other side of the cloud. It's hidden and abstracted away from us. So cloud computing, as I see it, is simply renting compute power and compute space, storage space, from a provider or vendor, and your services and your data reside and operate on their hardware, not yours. You're just paying for time. And in exchange for that trust, you're able to, on paper anyway, realize a much more robust ability to do disaster recovery, because the idea is with cloud computing, these providers have so many servers spread in data centers, hopefully all around the world, such that even if there were a catastrophic event that took out multiple data centers, your data would still have been redundantly copied to yet additional data centers, you see? So you've got much greater protection of your data, much greater availability, and you have a lot of tools and AI-powered capabilities that would normally be out of reach for most businesses to have, purchase, make, control locally. So the terms that come out to my mind from a top-level perspective when approaching cloud computing are trust and shared responsibility. I found in my working with people, students, friends, relatives, that almost universally, those IT professionals who are most resistant and stubborn about approaching cloud computing tend to be old dogs who've been in the industry for a long time and who are accustomed to interacting physically with their servers, screwdriver in hand kind of thing. And I don't want to say they're control freaks, but I'm going to generalize and say there's a large preference for control from the hardware all the way up, and a fundamental mistrust of allowing another vendor to maintain that hardware infrastructure and to keep your data and applications safe. It's reasonable, certainly. The major cloud vendors have all had breaches from time to time. They've all had outages from time to time. But the algebra that a business needs to do when considering cloud computing is weighing either side. Do we have the high availability capabilities in our infrastructure to get anywhere close the level of uptime that we could if we published our applications in the Microsoft Azure cloud or the Google cloud or the Amazon Web Services cloud? Probably not. They probably could make your data much more available. But then, do you trust the vendor? There's no question about it. You have to trust your cloud vendor. And if your company has an institutional bias against Amazon, let's say, against Google, against Microsoft, okay, then that's going to shape your decisions going forward for sure. I don't think there's any right answer here 100% of the time. We do, doubtless, give up control of our infrastructure chiefly, but not so much to our data when we're using a cloud provider. I have most of my experience in the Microsoft technology world, so I can speak most authoritatively on Microsoft Azure. But I know that Microsoft publishes all of their own attestations of all of the various governmental industry-specific regulations, compliance regulations. Microsoft, these cloud vendors, including Microsoft, audit themselves and share the results of those reports on a public website. So they're as transparent as they can be as far as how their cloud infrastructure works. And again, speaking from the Microsoft side of things, Microsoft feels very strongly that the customer's data is their own. So in the Microsoft Azure cloud, you can actually control your own data encryption key to the point where if you lost that key, Microsoft support wouldn't be able to unlock the data because you've taken control of that key. The vendor themselves doesn't have some back door where they can come in and unlock your data. So there's trust, and there's also shared responsibility. The main responsibility of the cloud service provider is to provide the infrastructure for you to host your data in a consumer world. Think of Dropbox, virtually limitless cloud-based storage, and you can put your MP3s and your ebooks and your work and your personal files in your Dropbox, and you can pull them down on any of your devices wherever you are in the world. You see? So we've got on the provider's responsibility, they're responsible for sourcing hardware and keeping it current and keeping it patched and backing up your data redundantly. That's part of the cloud provider's responsibility. What I want to make sure that we're always keeping top of mind, though, is that the customer also has a responsibility. The way I describe it to my students is that in the Microsoft Azure cloud, Microsoft provides the suite of capabilities, and they offer you various levels of abstraction to where if you want maximum control, you can deploy your services on your own virtual machines running in Azure, but you're still responsible for those virtual machines. The entire life cycle of them, including patching them up, updating them, backing them up, securing them, etc. And then there's various platform as a service offerings where Microsoft takes greater responsibility for the underlying compute, and the customer is responsible mainly for their line of business application, you see? And then there's some products that are practically entirely managed by the provider. Dropbox would be an example. From a customer's perspective, you're just interacting with your Dropbox in the very same way that you interact with the files and folders on your system or on your device's hard drive, you see? So all this is to say that when approaching cloud computing, it's incumbent upon the customer to get skilled up on what those controls are. I mean, if you are new to Microsoft Azure, you might not even be aware that you can do customer managed encryption keys for your storage, for your data storage. You see what I mean? And whereas Microsoft allows you to redundantly replicate your cloud-based databases, they don't do that by default. That's something that you need to opt into and configure yourself. That's the shared responsibility that happens with a cloud provider. It's really important for both parties to be aware of what the other party's responsibilities are, as well as your own responsibilities. Important stuff. And I would submit that this even applies to Joe or Jane Citizen, who are in their personal life. They have multiple software as a service or SaaS subscriptions. Maybe they subscribe to Google Docs, and maybe they have Dropbox. These various cloud vendors. You want to think about what's your responsibility versus what the vendor's responsibility is. In a case of something like a cloud save with Xbox, fortunately, that's pretty turnkey. It just happens automatically. I'm not sure if you have to have a paid Xbox account. I have had a paid account for over 20 years, so it's immaterial to me. But there's really nothing to do as such. Whereas if you become say a Microsoft 365 administrator and you're managing email and websites and document libraries and stuff like that on behalf of your users, then certainly you're going to be more interested in the details of what the cloud provider gives you in terms of backup, restorability, point-in-time restore, disaster recovery, service level agreement or SLA credits if the vendor has an outage. So that's what I'll wrap up with. to the old dogs in my life who are just, stuck in the mud in terms of no cloud, no way, I would challenge you and think about how many of these fears that you have regarding cloud computing, breach, off time or outage, misconfiguration leading to bad things, how many of those scary scenarios that you're putting on the cloud have already occurred in your local environment over the years? And what was the result of those events? I would challenge these old dogs to think along those lines, because you're dealing with the same fundamental pillars of things like confidentiality, availability, disaster recovery, performance, load balancing, all the traditional aspects of service delivery and IT nowadays. Think about how you've contended with those locally, and just how could you adapt that thinking to take advantage of the hyperscale and the various other doodads, that's my technical term for the day, that a public cloud provider can offer. Just something to think about. All right, this video's gone on long enough. Thank you very much. Hope you found it useful. See you next time.